Hey everybody, it's Josh Alexander from The Brokerage, your host of Orange County Housing Market News, your one-stop shop for all things Orange County real estate. So I go over local trends happening in the market, I interview other experts in the field, and then especially if you're a buyer or seller, I'll go over different tricks and tips that are going to help you out in today's market. So if you're thinking about buying or selling a home anytime soon, this is a great place to start. So don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And as well, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to hit the bell button. That way you're notified every week when I release a new episode. So on this week's episode, I'm going to be discussing Proposition 19. So it passed last year during the elections, but I still get a lot of questions about it and how it impacts real estate in California. So I want to go over that in a little bit more detail. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so Proposition 19. Like I said in the beginning, this was a proposition that was on the ballot last year in California. It did pass. There was a lot of attention that it received to the 2 months prior leading up to the election, but after that, the news coverage kind of stopped and it really dropped out of the media. So I wanted to bring it up again today because the last part of that proposition just went into effect on April 1st of this year. So I just want to bring it full circle and basically go over it again so you understand exactly what it is and how it might impact you as a homeowner or potential homeowner in the future. So this proposition is basically broken down into two parts. There's one, which a lot of people call the sweetener portion of it, which just takes existing propositions and expands them to make them more inclusive and have the ability for more people to take advantage of it, which is a tax savings. And then there's the other part, which is a more controversial portion of it, which has to do with passing your property down to your kids or grandkids and how that impacts their taxes when you do so. So let's go ahead and talk about the positive one first, and then we'll get to the other one. So to understand the tax savings portion of this proposition, you really need to have a little bit of background on what it's replacing. So Proposition 19 on the tax savings part of it did replace Proposition 60 and Proposition 90. So I want to go over what those are, and then I'll kind of go over the differences and how it's expanded this program to make it apply to more people and just be more flexible overall. So Proposition 60 and Proposition 90 basically stated that if you were the age of 55 or older, if you were severely disabled, or if you lost your house for any kind of natural disaster, you're able to basically sell your house, move into a new home, but keep the same property tax basis when you move, and so your home is not automatically reassessed to a higher property tax rate. And this was done to basically make sure that if a senior is trying to move from one house to another, they're not going to have some giant financial restriction because all of a sudden their property taxes are going to skyrocket because they're getting reassessed when they move to the new property. Now, there are a lot of restrictions in this law, so I'm glad they finally redid this with Proposition 19. But the three main restrictions that you saw with Proposition 60 and Proposition 90 are: the first one is that you can only use this once. So if you're a senior, you have to be very, very careful on when you decide to make that move, because once you use it, you lose it. So you can only use it once. And so seniors that were trying to figure out, should I move now to downsize or should I wait a little while to see maybe if my kids move to a different city and then I can follow them over there, they really had to very carefully decide when they wanted to actually sell their house to be able to take advantage of this proposition to keep their property taxes extremely low and make their financials much more affordable as they go off into retirement. So that was a big hindrance, and it really prevented a lot of people from moving around the state as freely as they wanted to because they really could only take advantage of this once. So the second main restriction, which I've kind of hinted at before, is that you can only move within certain counties. So Proposition 90 and 60 were not statewide. They were only specified to certain counties within the state, and there weren't that many of them. So before you moved, you had to verify that the county that you were moving to actually participated in these propositions. And so that way, when you decided to move, you weren't all of a sudden hit with a giant reassessment when you did the property taxes because that county didn't qualify. So that was another restriction that really prevented a lot of people from moving. So the third restriction was that when you sold your house and purchased a new one, the new home you purchased had to be the same or less in terms of overall value as the one you just sold. So if someone was trying to move from a lower cost area to a higher cost area, it was almost impossible to use these propositions to preserve that lower tax basis because you couldn't find a lower cost home in a higher priced neighborhood. So with Proposition 19, they really restructured everything and got rid of most of these restrictions. So on Proposition 19, instead of only being able to move once, you can now use this up to 3 times. So this is great for homeowners that, let's say the kids left, they're empty nesters now, they want to downsize so there's not so much home to take care of. They can do so, and then let's say their kids move to a different county within California. Now they can sell again, follow their kids if they want to, and that way they're close to family. And then let's say 15, 20 years down the line, now the grandkids are grown up, everybody's moved away. Now they can go ahead if they wanted to and move again, maybe someplace that's closer to the hospital of their choice or any kind of care they're looking for at that time frame. So this allows them a lot more flexibility to be able to move around based on their life stage and what's going on, versus to have to be very selective of when to use it only that one time. So these 3 times you can use it has definitely opened up the ability for people to move more often and to move based on more of their lifestyle needs versus just purely a financial decision. So the second thing it took away is that this is no longer restricted to only certain counties in California. This is now statewide. So you can move anywhere in California and this new proposition will apply. So again, this just allows more flexibility. You can move from Southern California to Northern California. You can move to Central California. It doesn't matter. Anywhere in the state, you're able to utilize this proposition to keep those low property tax bases. And then the third restriction it got rid of is that you no longer have to purchase a property that was the same price or lower. You're now able to purchase a higher cost property if you want to, but there will be some blending in terms of the property taxes, which I'll go over an example in just a second. But the biggest thing to take away from this is you can pretty much move to almost any property you want to now, as long as you're moving from a primary residence to a primary residence. So this opens up the entire state to be able to take advantage of this, and it allows a lot more flexibility. And the overall purpose of this law was to allow people to move more, to open up more inventory for California, because as everybody knows, we have a significant lack of inventory in California right now. So most of the housing laws they're coming out with in the last couple of years have really been aimed to try to impact the amount of homes that are available to allow people to start moving more freely. Okay, so I understand that even after explaining this, it can be very confusing still to kind of figure out what I'm talking about in terms of property tax basis, as well as this blended assessment if it's going to be a higher cost property. So I wanted to go over a quick example that kind of gives you 2 different scenarios so you can have a better idea and get a better grasp of exactly how this works if you were to move into a new property and you qualify for this new proposition on here. So let's go ahead and assume that, let's say maybe 20 or 30 years ago, you purchased a property for about $300,000. You want to go ahead and sell it today, and it's now worth $1 million. So let's go over the first scenario. So let's go say you sell that home for $1 million and you find another property anywhere in California that's $1 million or less that you want to purchase. Great. So this basically means that because you're purchasing a property that's the same or lower value than the house you just sold, you get to keep the tax basis based on that original assessed value of $300,000. So you're buying $1 million property, but only being taxed on the tax basis of $300,000, which makes it much more affordable to be able to purchase a higher cost property when you decide to move across the state. Now let's go over the second scenario, and let's say again you sell that home for $1 million, but you decide to move to a higher cost area and you're having to spend, let's say, $1.5 million on your new home. So the way this works is they take that original tax basis, which was that $300,000, and then they're going to take the difference of the price you sold your home for, which is $1 million, and then the new price of the home that you're purchasing, which is $1.5 million, or a difference of $500,000, and they're going to combine that original tax basis of $300,000 and that $500,000 to get a grand total of $800,000 as your new tax basis. So yes, it does increase your property tax base. However, when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, you're still only paying about half of what the actual property's value is, and you're able to purchase a property that's more expensive than the current property you own right now. So giving that flexibility, you're still saving a lot of money, and it's expanding the amount of options you have when you decide to move to a new property. So that wraps up that section of Proposition 19. Now let's go ahead and start talking about the more controversial section, which is the part that increases taxes, that has to do with transferring property from a parent or grandparent down to their kid or grandkid. Okay, so just like the first part of Prop 19, you really have to understand what this part of Prop 19 is replacing before you can really figure out what the changes are and how that's going to impact you. So let's first look at that. So this section of Prop 19 is going to be replacing Prop 58 and Prop 193. And that has to do with how property is transferred from a parent or grandparent into a kid or grandkid's name. Okay, so the way this worked before Prop 19 took effect was that if a parent wanted to transfer property to their kid, and let's say that parent owned the property for 20 or 30 years and had a super low tax basis, they were able to take that property, transfer it to the kid, and the kid was able to maintain that low tax basis and take full advantage to be able to have a very low property tax rate and to make it more financially affordable. At the same time, there was no limit in terms of the total dollar value of these homes that were transferred. So if a parent had a $20 million property they wanted to transfer to their kid, and let's say they've owned it for that 20 or 30 years and maybe only paid $500,000 for it, that kid was now able to take full advantage. And even though that home might be worth $20 million now, the kid was able to take full advantage of only paying taxes on the $500,000 original assessed value on there. So it was extremely beneficial for especially people that had a lot of money and had very expensive property to be able to transfer it to their kids or grandkids and be able to have their grandkids afford the payments if, let's say, they weren't making as much as the parents were, or just in general save a lot of money on their monthly mortgage, whether they could afford it or not, because you're paying a much lower tax bill. So no restrictions in terms of price. And then the third thing it was able to do is that if that parent had not only a primary residence, but let's say they owned an investment property in Big Bear, had another property out in Palm Springs, they were able to take any other properties they had and transfer a cumulative total of $1 million property tax basis over to their kid as well. So if that kid was to inherit, let's say, all three of those properties, and the property tax assessment for the Big Bear property was $500,000, the property tax assessment on the Palm Springs property was $400,000, they were able to still maintain that much lower tax basis instead of being reassessed at the current value of the home. So it was an extreme advantage for anybody that had a lot of property in their investment profiles, as well as a more expensive primary residence, to be able to transfer that to their kids and be able to have a much lower payment for their kids once they took ownership of that property. So now let's go over what Prop 19 did to that. So first, when you're trying to transfer a property from a parent to a child, the first restriction they now have is that the child must be using that as their primary residence. So they can't use it as an investment property. It can't be an Airbnb. They can't use it as a vacation home. It has to be their primary residence, and they have to move into that residence within a year of it being transferred to them. So that severely restricts a lot of these homes that maybe the kid doesn't live close by and doesn't want to move back. Now they have to either decide to move back, or it's going to be reassessed at the full value, and then most likely the kid is going to want to sell it instead of continue to hold it and keep it as part of their investment profile. And then in terms of additional properties, there's now no exception for additional properties. So if you have a second home, a vacation home, other rental properties in your investment profile, they are now going to be reassessed at full market value no matter what you do. And that's going to be transferred to the child when they take over ownership of it. So those property taxes are going to go up significantly for those that are getting transferred a lot of properties, because you can only really take advantage of that lower tax basis for primary residence if it's going to be a primary residence of the kid. So the final restriction that was part of Prop 19 is that when that transfer happens, whoever it's transferred to cannot utilize more than $1 million of total assessed value on the property. So what that basically means is if you're transferring a property from a parent or grandparent to a kid or grandkid, and that property value is $1 million or less, this part's not really going to impact you. The reason they put this into the bill was they really wanted to try to tax the ultra wealthy when people are trying to transfer properties that are $5, $10, $20, $30 million to their kids. They're basically limiting the tax basis that can be transferred over when they do so. So again, I know this can be a little confusing, so I want to give you an example on exactly how this works. Okay, so fair warning, the way they assess these property taxes is a little bit more complicated than the first part of this proposition, so hopefully it still makes sense to you. So let's go ahead and say that the assessed value of the property is at $500,000. The value of the property, the current fair market value of the property right now is $1.6 million. Well, the way they're going to determine what the new assessed value of the home is for the property taxes is they're going to take whatever the property value is and subtract that $1 million from it. So $1.6 million is what the property is currently worth. They're going to subtract $1 million, and that gives you $600,000. So the second part of this equation is they're going to take that difference, so in this case $600,000, and then they're going to look at the original assessed value of $500,000. Whichever one of those two numbers is the higher number, that's going to be your new property tax rate. So in this case, your new property tax rate will be based off of $600,000. So you can see that it's still not going to be taxed at the full market rate, which is still at least some relief for people trying to pass their properties on. However, once you get into the higher cost properties, when you're getting into that $5, $10, $15 million property range, when you take that minus $1 million and then you're taxed on the difference, that's a significant chunk of money that you're still taxed on versus what the original assessed value is. So again, this is really meant to really tax the ultra wealthy. When you're spending $10, $15, $20 million in a house, it's a way for them to increase the property tax rate when they pass on that property to someone else. So I hope those examples made sense. If you have any other questions about how this proposition works and how it might impact you specifically, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Other than that, I hope you found today's information useful. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you on the next show. Bye.